everybody, this is Rustin Rose with Metalholic Magazine and Metal Nation Radio. Joining us tonight, Drew DeCagna of Brimstone Coven. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing well, man. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. How bad did I butcher your last name?
I was just about to commend you for pronouncing it perfectly.
Go figure. So
You totally nailed it.
All right, so before we dive into Brimstone Coven, in the last month we've lost Scott Weiland, Lemmy, Bowie. Were any of them inspirational to you in any way with the stuff that you do?
Oh, well, I mean, definitely. I think that all those guys influenced more people than would admit. I mean, Weiland, I grew up listening to Stone Temple Pilots. That was like right when I was in high school. You know, the whole grunge thing happened, and they were one of the few bands that I actually gravitated towards out of that whole movement. I still listen to them all the time. You know, Lemmy goes without saying. If you weren't influenced by Lemmy, then something's wrong.
You're lying.
Everybody was influenced by that cat, I would say. And Bowie, I mean, I think that it's just sinking in on people now how much of an influence Bowie was on everybody. You know, as a brilliant songwriter, you know, influenced so many movements, the punk rock movement, the goth movement, like the club scene, like so many things. He was a huge influence on, and I think the ripple effect is just starting to get acknowledged now. You know that. It's a shame that stuff like that only comes to light when people pass away, but I really think that that's ringing true right now.
Absolutely, I would agree. So let's talk about Brimstone Coven. It's always hard. The first time you do an interview with a new band, there's always some generic questions you have to ask, but so many people don't know about you guys yet. So let's give the listeners some backstory, because you guys have all been friends for a while, I think. You even played together in another band, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's the band is ultimately Corey Roth's baby. He's the one that thought up the whole concept, and Corey and I have been in bands for probably about 12 years running now. We've never not been in a band, I think, ever since we became, you know, solid friends. And, yeah, we've been in different projects over the years. He's been in my projects. I've been in his projects. And John and Justin, we've known almost, I would say, equally as long. I can't remember the exact year that Justin moved up here. John was always from this area, but he's a bit younger than us. So it took him a minute to show up in the scene. But I know that Justin and John hooked up almost immediately as soon as Justin moved up here, and they got into a project that was basically just kind of like a demo project of Justin's right around when he moved up here, called Entropy, and it was like a death slash thrash kind of deal. Really good stuff, and they made it into a band, and they jammed it for years and years and years. And yeah, and then eventually Corey joined in on drums, and like right at the tail end of it, I joined in on bass. And when they recorded the full length for it, they didn't really have a drummer, and they were going to use a drum machine, so I did session drums on that recording. So yeah, we've all got tons of ties with one another. We've all been in each other's projects for well over a decade now in one form or another. So
you all seem to be multi-instrumentalists as well.
We are. Yeah, I would like to think that we are. Yeah, John plays multiple instruments. Everybody does, really. And I think, you know, Justin will tell you that he's more of a guitar player than he is a drummer. And, you know, I started out as just a vocalist in a band. I think I've been in bands doing one or more instruments in imaginable in each band. But and Corey can say the same thing. Yeah, we just like playing, man. And we always have. So it's like one of those things that you can't stop whether you even want to or not. You know, it's in your blood. You just do it.
Well, and when Corey first put this together and you and John came in, I believe you guys sort of switched roles, right? You originally came in looking to do the vocals, and John was going to do bass. And
yeah, when Corey first came to us with the idea, he said, "Hey, I got this project. You know, I think you'd be the right guy to do the vocals for it." I said, "Okay, well, let me hear something." So he gave me a song that at that time ended up being The Ancients off the first record, and I demoed vocals for it, and I handed it to him, and I said, "Here, man, I demoed these vocals, but I got to be honest, I don't think I'm the guy for you. I mean, listen to it. It's the vocals like technically work, but it just doesn't gel. Like it sounds too much like I have way more of like a traditional heavy metal voice, like a Maiden Dio type deal, and like I said, it technically worked over top, but it didn't sound right. You know what I mean? So he's like, oh, okay, well, I had John trying out for bass. Why don't you just play bass and we'll try John out singing? I said, that's a great idea because I've heard John sing before and I knew he had pipes. So I said, yeah, let's try that. And we tried that and immediately clicked. Everything just like fell into place, and there it was.
I haven't had a chance to really hear the first couple of albums, but obviously on this new one, I just reviewed it today, as a matter of fact. It turned out brilliantly. I love what I'm hearing. So,
oh, thank you, man. I appreciate that.
And talking about the vocals, one of the things that sets you guys apart from a lot of other of your contemporaries, if you will, is the fact that because three of you sing, you have those three-part harmonies that most other bands of your ilk don't really bring into it, and that's really the factor that I think pushes you guys over the edge, so you're not sounding like everybody else.
I would agree. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that's our feather in our cap, if you will. Sure.
Was that something you guys knew going in that you wanted as an element to highlight, or did it just sort of evolve?
Yeah, totally wasn't in the game plan to begin with because I think we just didn't know. And when Corey had stuff demoed and gave us stuff, I think there were definitely like two-part harmonies peppered throughout the songs. And I want to say that we were just playing those songs as is with the two-part harmonies, and another friend, the friend slash musician cohort of mine, Aaron Carey, just was kind of enlightening me to the world of three-part harmonies because I had no idea about them. And so I was kind of in the mind state of it. I just started to, like, whenever I heard a two-part harmony, I started thinking automatically about a third one. And so when we started jamming these songs, I started hearing the three-part and said, hey, I hear this. Can I throw this in? And he said, yeah, everybody agreed. Well, try it. And we tried it, and it worked. And it was just one of those things that we didn't know that we had until we had it, you know what I mean? And now, everybody kind of recognizes us for that, but it's one of those things too that we're kind of real careful not to overdo it either, because everything in moderation is awesome. Too much of any one good thing or bad thing is bad. So we try to not to like overkill the three-part harmonies just because we can do it. You know what I mean?
I didn't get any sense of there being too much of it on the album. I thought it worked out really well for what you guys were doing.
Thank you. We thought it out very carefully. We were very discerning not to overdo it.
So as I mentioned before, you guys self-released your first two albums before Metal Blade contacted you. The new album, Black Magic, feels to me, from what I have heard of the first two albums and from some of the things I've read, it's darker overall than the previous efforts. Was that sort of a natural progression of Corey as the way he was writing, or did the label sort of push you a little bit in that direction?
I would totally agree with you that it is a darker sounding record, and I don't think it was intentional. I just think it's just the way that it turned out. I mean, we were pleased that it turned out darker. I mean, we definitely aren't bummed out by it, but I think both in the production value, the production of it sounds darker, and I think that was a little deliberate. I think the bulk of the songs on the Metal Blade debut were a little too polished sounding after we got it done and like stood back and listened to it. I think we wanted it to be a little bit more classic sounding, and those quintessential classic creepy sounding recordings don't sound bright and polished. They sound dark and murky and gritty and dirty. So we did kind of want to do that intentionally, get a little bit darker in the production value, but the songs themselves, I think you're right, have a more morose and kind of somber feel to them compared to the other recordings, and that wasn't necessarily intentional. But like I said, we're totally cool with it. We're 100% satisfied with the way that it came out.
And you mentioned the tone of the record and the production, and everything, but you're the one that handled the production, right? You did it at your own studio.
Yep. We've done everything thus far here. We thought about going elsewhere for Black Magic, and we talked about it, and I think we put a few feelers out in studios, but I think nobody can get us in at the timeline that we wanted to get into, and we were a little more discerning too. If we were going to venture outward, we wanted, we had some guidelines. We wanted to try and do everything all analog if we could, and as well as I do, that's a fading medium, and not too many people record on tape anymore. They just don't. It's hard to find. And we found a couple of places, but like I said, the timeline just didn't work out. So we spent some money ourselves and got some tape equipment, and we didn't do the whole thing on tape, but like the bulk, the core of the recording was done on tape, and that being the drums were all done on tape and all the rhythm guitars were done on tape. We just tried to, we were kind of limited with the track count that we had, so we said, well, let's prioritize and get all the important stuff, you know. So we thought the drums and the rhythm guitars were the most important things to get that analog crunchy kind of feel to it, so that's what we did. And then the bass and the vocals and the solos were all done digitally.
And I think it makes a little warmer too when you do it on tape like that. So
oh yeah, for sure.
So I know we can't talk about all the songs on the album, it's just not enough time, but
understood.
But I certainly would love to know about my favorite track on the album, at least in the moment, is Beyond the Astral, which is also the longest one on the album. Tell me, I know Corey writes all the stuff, but from your perspective, tell me what you can about the song, the backstory, all that stuff, maybe putting it together.
That was an older song as far as how, when they were written for the record. That was one of the first ones written for the record. And it's kind of a standout song. I don't think that we ever wrote anything like it before. And I don't know. It's got a really heavy 70s feel to it to me. And as far as like the lyrical concept is concerned, it's all about what's astral projection. It's leaving the body and kind of searching for knowledge outside of the body. I don't necessarily know what Corey's motivation was behind it lyrically. I never do know. I don't think even he knows until he sits down and does it. But you're not the only person. Actually, when we first brought the pre-production songs to the label, Alan Averill, the guy that technically signed us in the first place, he like really gravitated towards that song and was like, this is the song, this is the one, like this should be first on the record, this is the best song on the record. Like he really liked it, and other people that have heard it thus far, like since it got released, earlier this week, have been like, this is the best track I've ever heard you guys do. It's one of my favorites. It's not necessarily my favorite, and it was kind of surprising that it's so many people's favorites, but obviously that's really cool. I'm super glad everybody digs it. It's one of my favorite ones to play live, I can tell you that. Yeah, it's a really fun song to play live.
Definitely adds a nice balance to the album, because a lot of times you get these albums where it's so much in the same groove that it's like, even if each song is wonderful on its own, it just becomes too much of everything together, and you gotta have some stuff to pick it up. And and one of the other songs that stood out for me, probably just because when I heard it, I immediately visualized a Quentin Tarantino film. I don't know why, but it was The Plague. So,
wow. Okay.
Because there's that moodiness going on there. There's a little bit of a folky feel to it, which added to that. I think the words I used were eerie undercurrent of creepiness.
Right on. Now, to me, that one screams like late '60s. Like the harmonies in it and stuff are like totally creeped out, dark late '60s kind of pop. And once again, I remember, I can't remember who it was from the label, but when we sent the final master to the label, a couple people came back and were like, The Plague is awesome, and As We Fall, those are our two favorite songs. And I was like, wow, those are the two mellow songs on the record. But once again, they're songs we love, but it just was kind of unexpected because they weren't like, the rockers, they weren't the upbeat songs. So we were, obviously didn't have any reservations about putting it on the album, but it's one of those ones that we don't put it on every set list because because it's mellow, you want to kind of put the rockers on the set list, you don't want to lose anybody's attention. And with those slower mellow ones, it hasn't happened yet, but we always got that fear like, if we play a mellow song, people are kind of might lose interest and walk away or something. So it's definitely not been on heavy rotation since we wrote it, but at the same time, it's one of those ones that I think that kind of blossomed in the studio. And I think we could say the same thing about As We Fall. Playing it live is one thing, but like when we recorded it, it like really came to life, I think.
Well, and there's a different dimension, as you obviously well know, between live and studio. When you're listening to an album, you want those moments, as we said, that sort of break it up. But sure, live, you want that energy, and it's hard sometimes to really slow it down, especially given the type of music that Brimstone Coven is all about.
Absolutely.
Now, you had said that Beyond the Astral is one of your favorites. I was going to ask you, because Corey writes everything, you get a little bit more objectivity. You can step back and go, okay, I like all the songs in the album, but me personally, because I didn't write them, What are besides that one? What would be your favorite, or one or two of your favorites on the album?
I would say, and this was the only break that we've had thus far from Corey writing absolutely everything, every word and every note, was is Black Unicorn. Black Unicorn spoke to me the second that I heard it. So much so, he gave me a demo CD with a bunch of finished songs, and there was that song at the end, and it didn't have any words to it. And it wasn't even a full song. I think it was like a 2/3 of a song or something. It was just a couple of riffs from that thing. And as soon as I heard it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I immediately heard words for it. I heard a vocal pattern for it. And I said, what is this song, man? What is it? He's like, oh, I don't know. It's just an idea that I threw down. I don't really have any words for it or anything, and I don't have an end to the song. I was like, I have words. I don't want to step on your toes here, but I totally have words. He's like, well, have at it, man. Go ahead. See what you can do with it. So I went home that night and I demoed vocals. And once again, it was like the old demo when I was trying out. Vocally, me singing it didn't sound right, but the pattern sounded right and the words sounded right. So I let him hear it and I let John hear it, and they're like, this is great. Yeah, let's just do this. So that song definitely has a soft spot with me. And I would say, apart from that, which another mellow one would be Forsaken. I think that's a sleeper track, and on the surface it kind of seems like a laid back, reserved song, but I think the more that you hear it, the more that the chorus gets stuck in your brain like glue and you can't get it out. It's a really simple song, but it's an incredibly catchy song, and it has a later 70s feel to it, to me at least. But that one's real close to my heart too. I always even though it's a slower song, I'm like, let's put Forsaken on the set list. I'm always that guy. Yeah, I would say those two are probably my favorites off the entire record.
Nice. Well, one of the things that I do have to laud you for is the production on it. And you play bass in the band, obviously, but you play so many other instruments and whatnot, but you didn't bury the bass, which that just happens far too often these days. So I appreciated that for sure, that it was right up there, and that you didn't over fuzz everything. So many bands who play in the similar genre to you, it's just there's so much distortion, you can't really appreciate what's going on.
I say that all the time, and when I get the often asked question in email interviews and stuff like that of, well, what do you think sets you apart from all these other bands doing this retro movement? Is that I cite that all the time, is that people either are playing music that's supposed to sound like it came out in the 70s, but there's, like you said, there's so much distortion drenched on it, or so much fuzz or something like that, that tonal clarity is just thrown out the window and you can't even tell what's being played. And that always kind of sticks in my craw. I think that's a badge of honor for us, is that we don't everything is what I would call low gain, especially in the guitar department, but everything's clear as day and it's still powerful. I mean, you don't necessarily need a ton of gain to sound heavy. Heavy is an atmosphere. It's not necessarily a level of distortion. And the bass, there's definitely, you can hear there's overdrive on the bass, but it's like you said, it's not too much. And as far as the level of the bass goes in the recording, you could thank Corey for that too, because I didn't necessarily want to bury it, obviously, but I had it sitting back further in the mix than where you hear it now. And Corey's like, no, this needs to be more up front. If anything, this is I hear this as a rhythmically based record, and that revolves around the drums and the bass. And I kind of hear the guitars a little more in the background than what you hear them. So mix it this way and see how it sounds. And that's what I did, and he was right. It totally, that's what created the atmosphere for the record, I think, are the levels in relation to one another as far as the drums, the bass, and the guitars go.
It very much to me had one of those old school power trio feels, like Dust or Cream, something like that, where it was just right there in your face.
Well, I appreciate that. That's a huge compliment, because both those bands are amazing. And yeah, you're right. I mean, we even talked about for a minute mixing it like an old Cream record and having all the bass on one side and all the drums on one side, the guitars and the vocals on the other side, an old, one of the first stereo recordings or whatever, if you will. And I can't remember why we strayed away from it. I think we were scared of playback issues on things like phones and mobile devices and things like that, and that was the main reason we strayed away from it. But we definitely entertained doing the old Cream mixing technique at one point.
Well, before we get out of here, one question that I like to ask people the first time I get a chance to talk to them, just to sort of help our listeners get to know you a little bit. Maybe you could, on the way out, give us sort of 3 albums that sort of informed your path musically, maybe those milestones where you sort of, changed what you were doing and took you to where you're at today.
Wow. Well, that's tough to choose 3, but I would definitely say Iron Maiden's Killers. That was definitely a life changer for me. That's still, to this day, probably in my top 3 records of all time. I think it's one of the best rock metal records ever written. I would say Fly By Night from Rush was definitely a life changer too. It's not my favorite Rush record, it's one of them. And Rush is my favorite band of all time, but I think that may have been the first Rush record that I heard. And so because of that, I have to give it credit for changing my life because it was the first thing that I ever heard. Apart from that, man, what would it be? I would have to say something more heavier and modern, like probably Slayer, like South of Heaven. That was definitely a game changer. I remember changing the way I thought about music in general when I heard that record. It was just so inherently evil. I remember being in Catholic school when I heard it for the first time, and a friend turned me on to it, and I remember being addicted to it and listening to it before I got on the bus for Catholic school, and I remember thinking this is wrong. It's so wrong for me to be listening to this right now. No one would approve me listening to Slayer before I got on the bus to go to Catholic school, but it opened my eyes to a ton of things and changed my it changed my mindset on almost everything in life, let alone music. So I'd have to give credit to that one too, for sure.
Awesome. Andrew DeCagna of Brimstone Coven, the new album, Black Magic, is just fantastic. I saw a thing said it was coming out on the 16th, but it actually comes out on the 29th, right?
Yeah, you're right. It was a misnomer. It got pushed back. At one point it was the 16th. Now it's the 29th for sure.
Right. January 29th. Thanks so much for taking some time to chat with us, and hopefully we'll get a chance to catch you on tour this year.
Thank you, man. I appreciate the time, and have a good night.